Gedaliah Blum is an American-Israeli influencer whose mission is to strengthen Israel and the Jewish people through proactive, values-based initiatives. He does that both within Israel as well as globally. He runs several projects, including what we call Dapei Katom, which is an online business directory promoting family-run businesses in Judea and Samaria. He also spearheads the Heartland Initiative, which we are going to talk about today. I'm Maayan Hoffman, Executive Editor of ILTV, and welcome back to the ILTV News Podcast. And welcome to you, Gedaliah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Now, I want to start out by just actually learning a little bit about you. You know, you mentioned you're an American-Israeli influencer, meaning that you made Aliyah to this country. Where do you live now? What brought you here, and why stay?
I was actually just thinking about this the other day because it's a long story. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I'll tell you that my grandmother was a single mother of 5, and she wanted to come to she had this beautiful table, and she wanted to sell it. And the White House under JFK wanted to bring it into the White House. They actually, the story is that when JFK first got into office, Jacqueline Kennedy walked in and said, "This decor is absolutely not in line with the level of the presidency." So they put out this nationwide ad in the newspapers and said, "Do you have any Americana furniture?" And so, to make a long story short, the White House came to my grandmother's house. They wanted to take the table for free and put a little brass sign on it. And my grandmother's like, "I'm a single mother of 5. I'm not going to give it to you. I'll sell it to you." They didn't buy it. That table didn't end up in the White House, and it actually ended up that it brought me to Israel. It's a very long story. I'm not going to get into it, but to make a long story short. My grandmother sold that table eventually to my uncle, and that enabled her to come to Israel for the first time. The first one in my family in 2,000 years ever to come to Israel. Mm-hmm. And I used that story in order to get one of 25 spots in the first birthright program that they've ever had in 2000.
Amazing.
So I used that story in order to get a spot, which was tens of thousands of people applied, and I got one of 25 spots.
Unbelievable.
And
wow.
So I was on the first birthright trip.
That was
in
2000, you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. Gosh, I forgot the birthright even started back then. And now you live in somewhere in Judea and Samaria today, right? Where are you living?
I live in Eli, which is the most beautiful community. It's situated between the ancient city of Shiloh and the modern city of the Shomron, Ariel, like right in the middle.
Yeah, it's super cool. You know, I used to run the Bible Marathon, and that is an amazing marathon out in the hills of the Shomron. And we used to start, before they changed the course and made it all on, mud and vineyards and whatever, we used to start in Eli.
Yeah, beautiful. So when they changed the course, and when it's only in the hills, and the Marathon Association said that was actually the hardest marathon course in Israel.
I don't want to talk about that because yes, it is.
That was my first marathon I ever ran.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, so the first year they changed it, I went to run it. Had no idea they changed the course.
Yeah.
And I show up and I'm like, and I did the Jerusalem the week before, and I go to run the marathon, and I think we're starting out and we're running 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers. We're all out in the hills, and then I look at the guy next to me and I say, "Hey, do you know when we get to the concrete?" And he's like, "Oh, we don't."
Yeah.
I finished the marathon. My feet were bleeding.
Yeah. You know what? 2 weeks before that, I was running 6K a day.
Oh,
that was it. And my wife's like, "Oh, the marathon's right next door. Why don't you run it?" And I'm like, she's like, "Why don't you run the 10K?" I'm like, why 10K? I run 6. Of course I could run 10. Maybe I'll run the half marathon. And then I call my father, "Listen, I'm running the half marathon." And he was a marathon runner back in the day. He's like, "Well, if you could run a half marathon, why don't you just run the full marathon?"
Wow.
And so he said, "If you could run 2 hours straight without stopping in the hills by you, then you could run the full marathon." So I did it. And it was probably the greatest thing I've ever accomplished in my life. But it was the craziest and stupidest thing I've ever done.
Because you were really sore afterwards.
I was done, yeah.
Yeah, that's really hard. So anyway, I want to jump from the hills. I guess we'll stay in the Heartland, but we're going to the biblical Heartland. But I want to jump to your Heartland initiatives.
Yeah.
Tell me, what it is and what inspired its creation.
So what really inspired the creation is the fact that Judea and Samaria was not on the map of our government ministries.
Okay.
The foreign ministry, whenever we had guests come from outside of Israel, they would avoid it like the plague. Because, listen, even if our ministers were supportive of the communities in Judea and Samaria, they have to play this geopolitical game where, okay, well, if we want to have good relations with the Egyptians, then we can't bring the Czechs to Shiloh or Hebron. It's not going to look good for them. So it was really to fill a gap. I felt like there was a big part of the map that was not only being ignored, but it was the essence of our existence in this land. Like, there's no legitimacy of Jews being in Tel Aviv if you give up our rights to Hebron, Shiloh, Beit El, and all these other biblical places. I mean, there's a reason why people say the Jewish people returned and reestablished their state and their ancestral homeland, but the center of the country before we were exiled was actually in Judea and Samaria. So I thought that was a big reason why we weren't succeeding, I think, on the geopolitical side of public diplomacy.
Has that shifted since you started the Heartland Initiative? I mean, are visitors coming now more?
Yes, but I don't think it's because of my work.
Okay.
I think that there's an issue today. There's a cultural war that's going on in the world, which is not new. It's just kind of like the temperature is rising. And I was actually inspired by this film that was produced by Rabbi Shor and Rabbi Shalom Schwartz. It's called Tragic Awakening.
Oh, yeah.
With Rowan Osman.
Uh-huh.
And the premise of this film really hit me to the core. And it was truly an awakening. It wasn't the film is called Tragic Awakening. I turned to the producer after a screening, and I said, "Listen, there was an awakening. It wasn't tragic. I feel like my eyes are open." And the premise of this story is that it starts 3,500 years ago when Moses received the Torah on Mount Sinai, and which became a new world order. It was a disruption of the levers of power that existed in the world by then. It's where a king and his servant who scrubbed his toilets are now seen equally in the eyes of God. That was never the case. And so all of a sudden we're bringing this new world order, this new value system. And ever since then, there are the power structures that are being threatened by that are still fighting against us. And this is why you see all the isms are against Israel and Jews. The communism, the Islamism, the wokeism. These are all power structures that are diabolically opposed to Judean Christian values. And so by focusing on Judea and Samaria and focusing on these Judean Christian values rooted in our shared heritage, you go beyond politics. And people are awakening themselves because they're saying, what's going on in my country? What's going on with my people? I'm teaching Christianity, I'm teaching Judaism in my home, but then I go outside of my community and I feel like everything is just against it. And I'm losing my kids to this wokeism that is completely against our true values, where people have freedom of expression, people are being canceled. You have, protection of personal property. No, we want to take it away and we want to give it to someone else. Like all of these things in society that are being pushed on the people on the ground, people are starting to wait, what's going on here? And so I'm actually leveraging the Heartland Initiative to connect people back into that base.
So you're using the land to connect people to their Jewish and Christian values?
I'm saying that the land is part of it. As you know, part of Judaism, there's three pillars. There's the Torah of Israel, there's the people of Israel, and the land of Israel. And it's like three legs on a stool. You cut one of them off, we're falling over. So we have to bring all of it together. So the people of Israel, what are we contributing to the world? What's the value system that we're bringing in that was adopted by the Christians, obviously? And then we have the land of Israel, which we have so many of our cultures tied to the land, to the harvest, to the holidays, all of these different things, we're directly connected to it. And then, of course, our Torah, our Bible. And so when I tell people, for instance, around the world, like, oh, you're a Christian, but you call Judea and Samaria the West Bank, why don't you just open up your Bible right now and just pull 80% of the pages out? Because that's what you're doing to it. You like the Jewish people are strong. We're going to survive this. We've survived 3,500 years of this threat against our value system. So we're going to survive. And so when you stand for Israel, do it for yourself. Don't do it for us. And I think that's my message. My message is, and that's not always been my message as well, because I was always very reluctant working with Christians.
Why were you reluctant? Because you were afraid they were proselytizing? Yeah,
they're proselytizing. And also it's just like there's a lot of pushback in the very extreme Jews. They're very like, oh, you work with Christians, and oh, we're not working with you. You're a missionizer, and you just didn't want the headache.
I think there was this whole thing with the end of days, right? That they were like just getting us here and helping us in order to have their Messiah. Which, by the way, I don't understand why people have a problem with that. I want to say because it'd be nice if Mashiach would come tomorrow and we'd find out, who's right, who's wrong. But the reality is that we're all kind of waiting in our face for the end of days, and so we each have our own faith beliefs, and we'll just see, in the end, someone will be right and someone will be wrong.
No, exactly, and and I think that also a shared enemy. Creates a shared cause. Always. And so the culture in the world has completely shifted in a really bad way. Mm-hmm. And we were, discussing this prior to this recording about Qatar.
Right.
How Qatar is a very strong influencer when it comes to social engineering.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
Even if it's against Islam. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to export a certain culture into and embed it into a community and watch them just fight each other and beat them up. Mm-hmm. If you ever played, if anybody ever played like Little League baseball, your coach would always say, "Hey guys, be quiet in the dugout. The other team is fighting with each other," and you're winning at that point. And I think that's where people like these Islamism is working against the West, and so with this war against us, it really is putting us in the same arena, and we have to say, listen, what are we going to do?
So I want to take a step back for a minute and look a little bit at the spirituality, that Israel is trying to sell. Israel is usually coins itself as the startup nation. We're technologically savvy. We want people to buy in because of our brains and the things that we're creating. But you're kind of taking it in a different direction. You're saying, yeah, that's all true. We're technologically savvy. We're strong in those aspects. Certainly militarily, we were trying to get some more gains in the last year and a half after the tragedy of the 7th. But you've got this other pocket here, and it's like the spiritual, it's the values, but it's also a spirituality. It's a deeper connection. Talk a little bit more about that, and does that sell? Are people buying into it given the wokeism and the culture that you just described?
So I think the spirituality is there, but it's not something I discuss.
Okay.
It's more of a very practical.
It's more of a morality versus spirituality?
It's a value system.
Okay.
What kind of value system do you want in your society, right? And once you get aligned with that value system in your society, then everything else comes easier, right? Because when it comes to Israel, when it comes to technology, for me, that's secondary. Mm-hmm. That's like, listen, there's a passage in the Bible that says, if you bless Israel, you'll be blessed.
Correct. Genesis 12.
As you know, you travel the world, Maayan. You have the greatest job in the world. I believe.
Do believe that too. Thank you. I agree. Yes.
And if your producers are owners, I think she deserves a raise. By the way.
Thank you. Well, wait, let's re-record that again a little louder.
But no, this would be one of my dream jobs, because the fact is that you're not just reporting on the news. You are amplifying voices. You're amplifying messaging. You're not going to people. You're not going to Qatar and going to some 5-star swanky hotel and talking to Hamas and giving them a platform. Because it's bad for the world, and you're a very moral person. And I think that overall, when it comes to giving good Jewish people in Israel the ability to amplify, we become this mirror of the blessing. They bless us, we want to bless them back. We're too small of a nation. Our goal, there's a whole understanding of tikkun olam, like fixing the world.
Right.
We're 10 million people in the world, maybe 15, whatever it is.
About 15, yeah.
And even then, in the next generation, who knows? The core of Jews are going to be in Israel. We are now, but it's even going to be much more because of assimilation.
The gap is widening, yeah.
But we can't fix the world by living in a bubble. Our job in this world is outreach.
To be a light unto the nations.
Yeah, but not to bend over backwards to cultures and say, oh, please love us. What do we need to do for you to love us? No, we're resolute. We're strong. We know our value system had lasted the test of time, like no other society, no other civilization. In fact, Western civilization is based off of our Bible. America in the West is some of the most successful societies that have ever existed in the history of the world. Prosperity, health, longevity of life, even with all the problems, it's still the greatest place.
I think it's getting less healthy in the United States as we speak. But,
no, it's getting less healthy, but I think, but overall, I believe that people are good, and this is why the Heartland Initiative actually exists, is because there is a very loud and organized and well-funded minority of people with a big voice and very powerful. But there's also a very silent majority, a much larger silent majority. And it's my job, I believe. And again, I don't have a magic wand. I'm just one person. In fact, I'm here to hope that maybe I could inspire other people to use the two hands and the two arms that God had given everybody and affect the change that you could do within your own circles. And everybody reaches hands, we could have a lot more of a reach, right?
So what are you wanting people to do when you talk about that? I mean, what do you think is the way to make this shift?
I think first and foremost, people need to have the awareness. We're facing an existential threat to our value system, number one. Number two is make sure that whatever you start with starts at home with your family.
Okay.
Number two, your community. Number three, find organizations, find communities that have the same lighthouse and same value systems and understand that there is an existential threat and that the way to fight is not necessarily to respond, but to build. Mm-hmm. Find organizations that are doing positive things, because in order to stamp out the darkness it is to create more light. And I believe that through doing positive actions and getting the silent majority activated, we can make the loud minority that's very well organized and very well funded irrelevant.
And it sounds like such a basic lesson, but I think it is true that it's not happening. You know, when I grew up, at least one of the things my parents taught me, which I more or less follow, but sometimes not well enough, I think, is, you know, this whole idea of it doesn't help to fight when somebody is going against you or to push back, as you said, and if they criticize you, now you criticize them. It's actually more about just do good. And then hopefully, you know, in the end, truth rises to the top.
Yes and no. I mean, there are times when somebody punches you in the nose enough times, you got to punch them back.
Yes.
So we can't be weak and we can't ignore them.
But what you're saying is actually to build this stronger as opposed to just trying to push this weaker. And the stronger you get, if I'm understanding correctly, the weaker they will inherently get because you're stronger.
I mean, if I'm building a building, okay,
right,
with my own hands, and it takes time. And I'm building one level after the other. Yeah. And then somebody comes up to me on the other side and turns my attention away and says, why are you building in that color? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And all of a sudden, I'm going to have a dialogue with them. What am I doing with my building? Nothing's happening.
Right.
So this person is just a keyboard warrior. They're essentially not relevant, but I'm making them relevant by turning my attention to them and taking away from my work.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of our problems even within our own government is engaged with. We are turning around while we're supposed to be building a building. Let's stay positive. Let's keep building. And let's focus on the silent majority of people who, like, even today, forget about politics in Israel, but there is a majority that supports a certain side of the spectrum. But what's happening right now? Everybody's turning to the opposition. What are you saying about us? Right. It's part of their design. It's their design in order to take away our attention. And I think that we need to change the way that we're thinking. Yeah. We need to make them irrelevant.
Makes sense. I mean, I think about South Africa as probably the core example of that, where you have a government that is so absolutely anti-Israel and speaking on behalf of almost none of their constituents. When they do polls in South Africa, what they generally find is 80 to 85% of the society is actually pro-Israel. Many of them are actually evangelical Christians or Christians who are very into the biblical aspect of Israel, but also just in general supportive of the Jewish state, of the war against terrorism. And then you see us, you know, in the international criminal courts getting taken by South Africa. And it's actually ludicrous when you think about it, how in this supposed democratic society, but where all the attention goes is to that little minority, the loudest, the government, versus all of the people.
Yeah.
It's really...
Which creates opportunity.
Creates opportunity.
Because we know where the power really is. There's a perceived power that people are just like, okay, you ever see this cartoon of like all these people standing on a plank and there's one person standing off a cliff and he's the leader? People could just walk off the plank and the leader falls off the power is with the people. And so how do you get people, let's say, for instance, South Africa, which is a predominantly Christian country. I went to South Africa a couple months after the war started, which was like, I think I was the only Israeli that went there.
Wow.
And the reason why I went there was not to fight against anybody, but I knew through some of my activities that there was a number of different communities that were very openly supportive of Israel, whether in the past or afterwards. I went there to say, what can I do to help you? What can I do to strengthen your resolve as a South African in order that you continue to fight for your culture, your faith, your Bible, and then stay connected with Israel? And it was very successful. And a lot of activities came from that afterwards. And that's a perfect example of how to do. But I spoke at a church, and I was so surprised. I walked in. I'm the only like white person. Like I was literally in a township.
Oh wow!
Like a very poor township that actually Hamas had actually moved into.
Oh God!
And they were giving out food. This is what they do first. They just open up a food truck and they give out food to everybody.
Which is striking considering Hamas is in the middle of a famine in Gaza. How do they have access to food?
Qatar. Because all roads go back to Qatar. But the idea though is that I walked into the church and I was so surprised that there was South African flags and Israeli flags on stage. And they're like, this is we believe in the God of Israel. So there's the faith in the Christian faith in South Africa and Africa in general is very strong and very simple as well. You know, us Jews, we try to complicate things too much. You know, you work in the news. You're like trying to dissect everything and like we need to learn from the Africans. Like good, bad, black, white.
Yep.
Move on.
That's funny. I was just in Ghana, and I actually was thinking about that afterwards. I wrote even like a little social media post before my articles and whatever else will come out. Just really, I was only there for 4 days, and I've been to Africa many times, not to South Africa, actually to other areas. But it really is a special place because people are very happy. And you question, like, how are people who live in such poverty? You know, some of them, I mean, I was visiting some of these hospitals where they have literally nothing. And they always have a smile on their face. And what you realize is because they don't know difference. And they just take life very simply and very black and white, as you said, you know, and they have a lot of faith. And it's really a beautiful
you know what? I agree with that in one sense, but in the other sense, I know that the old films that I've seen in growing up in America, the slavery and the chain gangs, and you're like, well, the black people are singing, they must be happy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think in their core, I think that they realize that there is a standard that they're not achieving.
Yes,
right?
But I don't
so
think
that
impacts their day to day.
No, but I think the fact that their resilience is they're not despair. They don't despair, and I think that's what connects me as a Jew to the Africans because, I mean, Rabbi Nachman always talks, don't despair. Like it's part of our core ethos, despite the fact that all the craziness that goes on throughout our history, our living history now, our past history, our collective history, we have every single reason not to exist, and we have every single reason to despair. And when I go to Africa, I see poverty. I see women's health is a very big issue. Huge issue. The politics, the corruption. They have every reason to despair, but they don't. And I think that's something that, you know, we're looking for. My work between Israel and Africa is not focused on this like the white savior. You know, it's not happening that way. It never worked before in Africa. It's not going to work. It has to do with partnerships, cooperation. That goes both ways. We have a lot to learn from Africa, and they have a lot to learn from us. And I think that if we create this platform for that is rooted, again, back to Heartland Initiative, rooted in our faith and our values. Everything else is secondary.
Gedaliah, how do you think it is that the Judeo-Christian values got usurped the way that they have, that there's become this war against this value system?
Because with globalization and the transfer of people and money, the wars in the Middle East that erupted into one of the worst refugee crises that Europe has ever seen, especially the state takeovers by cynical players of Iran, Qatar, Russia, China into Africa. It all of a sudden it becomes like, okay, before 30, 40, 50 years ago, even before that, you're like, okay, you're there, you do what you want, and I'm here, I do what I want.
Right.
But now all of a sudden people are walking into your house and telling you to like seek Heil. Like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, that goes against everything I'm about. But they do it because, and by the way, they don't push themselves through the door. They knock on the door and they say, here's a nice envelope full of cash. Can you let me in? Oh, I'm going to give you food. I'm going to do this. I'll build you roads. Right. And all of a sudden they start buying up these politicians and then they start pushing their own policy. And I think it becomes like the frog in the water kind of thing. But, you know, again, the whole culture part, it's just kind of, people are waking up like, what just happen?
How
did we get this far?
Do you see a direct connection between this battle against Judeo-Christian values and the anti-Semitism that is rising so rapidly globally?
Yeah, of course. It's directly related. And this goes about what I was saying before, bringing back to the film Tragic Awakening, is that this new world order that's being spearheaded by the Jews for the last 3,500 years, and now it's manifesting itself in its own independent country of Israel. And in order for people to fight the Jews, they have to fight Israel. They have to fight our Bible, the three pillars. They have to start cutting off these legs, as I was saying before. And this is definitely why there's Jew hatred in the world, is because of what we represent. And this is why I tell my Christian friends all the time, don't tell me that you're just standing with Israel. You know, don't say, oh, I support you. We're not separate. They're fighting us, but they're coming after you. They're coming because they're not fighting after Jews. They're fighting after our value system and what we bring to the world. You've adopted this value system.
Right. How do we do that? How do we push back?
Faith leaders. Faith leaders. Faith leaders need to get into politics. They've always said, you know what, leave the politics to the politicians, and we're going to stick with culture. But as you know, culture and politics have converged. There's no difference anymore today. So the church leaders have no choice but to bring their millions of followers to say, listen, and I'll give you an example. We had the leader of a very large church from South Africa come to Israel 2 weeks before the national elections in South Africa, and he stood up on stage, very pro-Israel, very faith-based. Obviously, he's a church leader, and he said in his native Zulu tongue to a video that ended up going out to all of his members, 8.5 million members of 55 million people in South Africa, and he said essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, the ANC government is voting against Israel. They're attacking Israel. God is with Israel. The ANC is going against God. If you vote for ANC, you go against God. 2 weeks later, there was national elections. The ANC lost their overwhelming majority for the first time in 40 years.
Wow.
And they had to have a coalition with a new party that's much more sympathetic to Israel. So it's all through faith-based. I think that's the way to do it.
Faith-based diplomacy.
Faith-based diplomacy. Just, again, like, listen, we're fighting a war. You're waking up and you're saying, what's going on? The politicians that I've been supporting for the last 10, 15 years are going against all the values that I teach in my church. Get in the game. Get involved in politics. Start picking some people out of your congregation and start pushing them into politics, but keep them in your church at the same time, because politics is very dirty, and a lot of people they you have to play the game in order to succeed, and that means going into the dark side. So we have to keep them clean. We have to keep them in government and keep them accountable and true to their faith.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I think on that note, we're going to wrap it up. But Gedaliah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Maayan.